Is it me now?
Yep, you're ready to go, Steve.
Okay. Awesome sauce. So yeah, I'm Steve Hadcock. I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Capital Area Ag and Hort program, doing beginning farmer market development education in 4 counties in Eastern New York around Albany. My my background is actually in animal agriculture. All of my undergraduate degrees are in animal science. Um, Plants generally survive in spite of me. But one of my interests and desires is business management and the out various and sundry aspects of that. Um, so today I was asked and happy to share a presentation on business structures, something that would be something that needs to be thought about. Um, Obviously, initially when you're starting a business, doesn't matter if it's a farm business or not. And then throughout the lifetime of the business, also think about how that business continues to be structured. So to start off, for any business, there needs to be some sort of business structure, and by default, there is a business structure. And we'll talk about that. What that business structure does is it defines the business ownership and responsibility. There are several business structures options available to a business owner. First, need to identify the various factors to learn the needs of the business has in selecting the best business structure for at least the near future. A business is or should be a dynamic entity that changes over time. My feeling is that if the business is the same for any length of time, it's not going to be successful. So it has to change. The type of business structure then that's going to be best suited for the business today may not be the one that will be beneficial or suitable in the future. So some factors to consider would be the number of people involved in owning and managing a farm, maybe even in operating the farm. There may be some key individuals that don't have any ownership in the business, but still uh, the managers and owners of the business may wish to recognize them. Um, so this is important to determine how profits and equity are shared amongst those involved. What is the risk exposure? What risk exposure does the farm have? Um, Also think about a structure that will assist with farm succession, some because of kind of front loading or working on them at the beginning will make farm succession, farm business succession, farm transfer easier or more streamlined, and then also tax implications also. So it boils down to having to be a balance between, what are your goals? What are the factors that are involved that are unique to the business that you're in right now compared to the complexity, the initial costs and operating costs of the um, business structure that is chosen is as the number of people involved in owning and managing a business increases, that's going to increase the complexity of the business potentially, and therefore may need a more complex business structure. And then depending on the size and scope of the business, there some of the business structures that we'll talk about today are quite expensive, honestly, are quite expensive to establish, and also to operate or to maintain. And so depending on the size of the business, the complexity are all factors should be factors that go into determining what business structure might be the best to choose. So a place to start would be is who's sitting around the table? Is it one person, two people, two or more people that are managing, owning and operating this business that may quote unquote have a stake in this business? And if there are, even if there's only one, take time to think through why do you want to choose the type of business structure that you find appealing or feel that you need. What's motivating this thought in your mind? And when more people are involved, then that means it is a group discussion, and there may be various the needs and the thoughts and values are going to be different for those sitting around the table. And so ultimately, some type of consensus needs to be arrived at what kind of business structure be the best to transfer to or start with this business. Trust me, having the conversation ahead of time is going to save some headaches later on as the formate as this as a business structure may change and go to a different form. But certainly, as we'll discuss towards the end, it also helps that when things do change in the business and people come and go as far as management and ownership of the business. So let's dive into this then. So what are the various business structures? These are the ones that are the most common that are available to any business in New York State. So we start with the simplest, which would be the sole proprietorship. Then there's a general partnership. Then we have the three types of corporation, C, S, and B. We have a limited liability company, and then finally a cooperative. And let's go into details talking about each one. So what about sole proprietorship? It's not a legally separate business structure. If you are operating a business, filing income tax returns and so on, and other things, are doing business under your own name or farm name, then it's one and the same. There is no legal separation between you and the farm business. Um, what that also means then there's no separation between personal and business assets and income as well. There are minimal formation costs. You don't have to, but if you have a farm name or a business name that you wish to use, then it would be prudent on your part to file a DBA or doing business as, and that's done with the county clerk's office, and a very simple, straightforward procedure to do that, and I think I think about what I've usually seen is like a whopping $25 to file a DBA. And actually more than one person can be on a DBA. So if there were two of you, you could form a DBA listing two people on it. So what are some of the factors to consider when thinking about or considering is sole proprietorship the structure that for us or me will be the one that we want to use. It's already kind of alluded to that. It's inexpensive and it's by default what you are. But what one of the things to be thinking about is that there's no separation as far as liability and also for so liability risk, credit risk, all of that comes back directly to you as the owner of the business. So all personal and business assets, there is no separation between personal and business assets. The especially starting out, there may be a limited ability to raise capital through financing because of an unknown track record. And also the fact that there is no separation between business and personal assets, then everything is kind of at risk. You I put in here silent partner in that, for has been and still continues that, a farm may be operating as a sole proprietorship with a spouse, two individuals, a husband and a wife, or two married couples Um, and one of the couples is listed, especially for tax purposes, as the owner of the business. Well, but the other one is still involved in the business, operating and managing the business on a daily basis. But they are going to be quote unquote the silent partner and not really receiving any of the credit and of being recognized as operating this business. But then again, also, um, if the and then especially with a non-married couple, it gets complicated if something happens to the sole proprietor as to how are if the something happens to the sole proprietor, especially upon death, what's going to happen to this business? So, um, need to think carefully about whether sole proprietorship may be a good option for you. Moving on to general partnership, it's at least two people need to be working together and managing and operating a business, owning a business to be able to be called a partnership. There needs to be a written agreement between all parties involved, um, and which define, and in that you need to define the interests and voting control. You may or may not need to have a DBA. You still could have a DBA to say that we're doing business as such and such farm partnership. Um, so you could do that. So factors to consider would be is that it's fairly easy to form, but generally lacks perpetual existence, meaning that once something happens to one of the partners, um, then it's done. It's gone. It's over with. Unless in the partnership agreement there is some language which does allow for how new partners can be added and how partners can leave. So it could um, and be potentially something that could exist for a very long time or in perpetuity. Um, like sole proprietorship, though, is that the partnership, even though there is a little bit of some separation here, the the partners are personally liable legally for to creditors, and there's no separation between personal assets. And then there's also what is called flow through taxation. And a quick explanation of that, and that the link that I have there explains it a little bit more thoroughly, is that a partnership, legally formed partnership does not pay taxes, if any are due, income taxes, that is. And so a tax return is prepared for the partnership. And then the partnership, this business entity, then gives each partner involved another form which they add to their income tax return, which shows whether the partnership created some income tax liability, or if the partnership created a loss, and therefore the loss will be added to the each individual's partnership's return. So, and then you also need to have some type of about the governance of it. So moving on to corporations. Corporations, though, are a separate legal entity. It's they could do, and if we go back to many years ago, the where the Supreme Court ruled that corporations, a company, but specifically a corporation, is a person and has personal rights. Um, that another way to think of it is that if you do form a corporation, and let's say there are three members to the corporation. Well, sitting around a table, you need four chairs because there are the three members or the owners of the corporation, but then the corporation in of itself even though the chair is going to be empty, is a separate entity and needs to be at the table when considering making decisions. You file a certificate of incorporation with the state. You can do shares of stock, or there are shares of stock that are with a corporations, and then the shareholders need to elect a board of directors. And that's composed of officers. The board of directors is composed of officers. And in a family business and a family corporation, it can be one person or it can be the whole family. And it's the board of directors that oversees and manages the business activities. So honestly, before I go into each of these types of corporations, with the introduction of limited liability companies, which we'll cover in a minute, don't really see too many farms forming a corporation, mainly because of its complexity. It does add a higher level of complexity, record keeping, accounting, so on and so forth. But I'm not ruling out that there may be instances or circumstances where a farm business may want to consider one of the three types. So the first one is as C corporations. You can read there what I just do want to underline the underlined words there, double taxation, which means that unlike a partnership, a C corporation is taxed twice. So that means that if a tax liability or tax is calculated and is due, the corporation will pay that, but then the corporation board or members will also may have to pay a tax as well because of the profits that the C corp made. So something to think about. And C corps are pretty complicated. In my experience, tenure as an extension educator working with farm families, I've only come across one farm that was a C corporation, and I think that was because they formed it so early that the S corp or the other two alternatives were not available. So there's also S corporations, um, and they were formed to make it easier before LLCs were formed or were instituted, to make it a little bit less complicated to form some type of corporation. And like a partnership, they also are passed through taxation, meaning that an S corporation will not pay any tax liability that may be due to the activity of that corporation. It's passed down to the shareholders. A form is prepared and the shareholders will receive a tax form showing or demonstrating how much tax they may have to pay or what was the operating loss of the S corporation, and they can add that to their own tax return. There's been some interest in farming and forming a B corporation. This is something I honestly don't know a lot about, but it is something different than an S and C corp, but it's also something that a corporation that is formed, you have to go through a certification process in order to be um, designated as a B corporation. And the B stands for benefit, and it's really boils down to um, how as kind of the culture and mindset of how the corporation is to be um, managed and operated. It's for the benefit, obviously, of the stockholders, but benefit of the general public too, is how I would interpret it. So some factors to consider. So that now with forming a corporation, there is personal liability protection, and the individuals in general are not going to be personally liable. So, if when setting up a corporation, you want to, there has to be some, generally will be some assets that are contributed or placed into the corporation for the operation, the daily operation of the business, such as machinery, buildings, supplies, so on and so forth. Those would be business assets, and then corporation assets of the corporation, but personal assets such as the land, personal vehicles, and personal bank accounts, so on and so forth, would not be placed in the corporation. It would be completely separate from the corporation. Especially starting off, would probably need to likely provide, though, personal guarantees on loans, because the corporation does not have, even though the members of the corporation or do or have been operating a business and have business have a good credit history. This is a new entity, and so therefore it will may need some guarantees on loans. Um, and Rory kind of stated that is that a business is a separate entity from the people involved, so that it can own physical assets. Um, you must. So how do you get it started? You have, well, one first place to start is a certificate of incorporation with the New York State Department of State. Um, so one thing that, as opposed to sole proprietorship and then a, a partnership, is that there's the corporation is going to spell out, and it's certainly through the operating agreement is will continue to spell out how voting rights may be transferred. So it is a more of a seamless way of perpetuating existence, but it is expensive to maintain. You're going to need legal assistance. There are going to be filing fees, and then you need to have an annual meeting. And the cost to operate is also going to be more as well, because you're adding a great deal of complexity to how this business is operating. So moving on to many farms now, I would say, if they are considering an alternative to sole proprietorship, what I've observed is a limited liability company. It is available in New York State. Like a corporation, it is a separate entity and kind of acts the same way as a corporation in that way. It may be you may have a single member LLC, but then you can also have a multiple member LLC. Like with the corporation discussion before, you do have personal liability protection, but you need to work to make sure that that stays in force and is in place. Um, and it may be managed by the members or one or more of a manager. How it's slightly different because it's not a corporation, it's a company. So that means that if you are filing articles of organization with New York State Department of State, and you must draft a written operating agreement and publish it. And you could, we'll talk more about operating agreements in a moment. So what are some of the factors to consider? Well, if it's a single member LLC, then it's going to be taxed as a sole proprietorship. As a so as an LLC, you still have the separation of personal and business assets, or the separation between personal and business liability. You're not losing that, but it will be taxed as a sole proprietor. Such as the partnership and also an S corp. It is a flow through taxation, like I've already explained. Um, but there is limited stakeholder liability, but like starting a new corporation or any entity, there may be not liability or protection from liability for lending point of view, and again, may need some personal um, make some personal commitments to a any loans that are taken out. Um, and then I did to for also the link there is on how LLCs are taxed. So I do get questions from individuals and others that are thinking about looking at business structures, and they say, well, what if we were to form a cooperative? You know, we have two, three, five of us that are farming together, that are operating this farm business. We want to form a cooperative so that because of our our culture of how we make business decisions and manage this business. Um, and it's possible, but that's typically what I would tell people is that if you a cooperative to form a cooperative is very complex, and that it's generally done for other reasons, such as that second bullet there is either to procure goods and services, to be able to buy collectively together to get volume discounts, or to be able to even buy some things that you may not be able to get potentially delivered to you because of the small quantities that you want. So buying in bulk, would be one thing, or services, and then marketing products. Think of like milk cooperatives, or Ocean Spray actually is a cooperative, a farmer cooperative. And why did they form it? Well, a group of cranberry growers got together and realized that it made sense for them to get together to market their cranberries together so that they would be able to have a larger volume of cranberries and cranberry products to sell, uh, and be able to go nationwide rather than just being an individual farm trying to sell their cranberry and cranberry products locally. And it's worked pretty well for them. So that's kind of the intent of a cooperative. Um, so any profits that a cooperative generates will be either reinvested in the business, or they are passed on to the members as dividends, and they are formed by under the authority of state law. So I say that the structure of government is similar to a corporation, that it has a board of directors and so on, but it is different in the fact that it's much more democratic. Obviously, you think about the larger corporations in the United States, they are very aware and keen of keeping their stock, especially if they have stocks that they have stocks, they're very keenly aware of keeping their stockholders happy. But, they, the decision making, stockholders do get some input onto making some cha decisions on how a corporation is governed and operates. But a cooperative is much more democratic, or potentially is much more democratic, and seeks and wants more input from its membership, the of the cooperative, um, in making decisions on how it's operate the vision and the operation of a cooperative. So with a cooperative, you are getting the liability protection, but it is a very expensive form of business structure, and I would as a similar to a corporation, and I would say like a C corp, it would be very expensive. So what are some of the differences in that? Um, is that, as I said, is that um, if there's any earnings that are to be distributed to the patrons or the members of the cooperative, it's usually based upon the patronage, or the amount of the cooperative an individual member owns, and that's just determined in the initial documentation of a cooperative. They can be exempt or non-exempt from federal income taxes. Um, if not exempt, then they're going to be taxed like a corporation. This is really more for farm cooperatives. We're not going to talk about any other kind of cooperatives, but I believe, but they are immune from antitrust laws. And if any of you remember your high school history, you may recall that you learned about the Capper-Volstead Act. At least I remember we talked about it then, and that is gives immunity from and to a large degree to antitrust laws to farm cooperatives, which means that they are able to do price fixing and not and establish prices as of what they wish to charge for the products that they sell. So that's all we're going to do and talk about business structure. Those are the big ones and the ones that are available to a business in New York State. So want to do another kind of deeper dive or discuss some other things and considerations when thinking about business structures, particularly something that other than sole proprietorship. So when you're operating a business with others, you need to be thinking of the 5 Ds. And we'll talk about what the 5 Ds are in a minute. And you really need to have an operating agreements. I've heard too many horror stories about a business not having one. And some type of business structure was developed and they didn't do an operating agreement, or it was not written all that well, so that when something happened, it could have caused a catastrophic collapse of the farm business. So, what are the 5 Ds? So, the 5 Ds are death, divorce, disability, disaster, and disagreement. These are all things that need to be considered when forming an operating agreement because um, for sure, we all know that there's one certainty in life, it's death and taxes. So at some point, a member of the uh, uh, business structure it will die. Um, you know, so that how will that be taken care of when a member of the business structure dies? Um, Divorce and disagreement. I'm going to kind of cover those two at the same time. Um, One of my predecessors in extension said that he spent half his time getting uh, farm families into a partnership. That was back when they were more popular, and the other half of the time getting out. You know, life changes, people's attitudes and values change, and so consequently, what started out as being kind of a honeymoon phase or everything was going fine, over the years things soured, and so one member of the part of this business structure decides that they want out. So that needs to be taken needs to be discussed and how that will handle. With the divorce, now got to remember that a members uh, of an LLC, for example, may be married or have a partner. If they separate, well, what happens then? Because especially with marriage, and when a couple separate and are going through filing for divorce, the partner that is not a member of the LLC is entitled to a certain proportion of that LLC because they were married to someone who was part of a member of that LLC. So another thing to consider. Then, what happens when there is a disaster as well? Um, and kind of racks or harms the business. And then disability, may a member of the um, LLC or the business structure may not die, thankfully, but they may not be able to, maybe temporarily or permanently unable to work or manage this business and be a member of a functioning member of this business structure. How is that going to be handled? So all of these, the 5Ds need to be discussed, certainly up front need to be discussed, talked about, and then with some help, how to come up with an operating agreement to be able to address all 5 of them. So there are some resources that Lindsay will be able to share these slides with links, and the links to all of the resources that I've shared with you today are in there. And so you'll be able to review this. So there is an example of a farm operating agreement that you can look at as and use for discussion purposes with everyone that may be involved in establishing this LLC, but any business structure for that matter, other than sole proprietorship. So there are the resources. And I would strongly encourage you to develop a team, a management team, not only around this, but consider having meetings with maybe your extension educator if you've got a good working relationship with them, your accountant, an attorney, your lender. All of these people can provide, certainly have the expertise and experience to help guide you through the path of establishing some type of business structure, and then meeting periodically with them to say, well, how is the business structure going? How is the business going? How can we help? And what advice or what might we be able to help assist you with in operating this business? So there's my contact information. And I'll stop here, turn it back over to Lindsay, and we'll have questions at the end.
So much, Steve. That was a wonderful presentation. I am going to share my screen and start it from the beginning. Okay. So my name is Lindsay Pajda. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension's Harvest New York team. So I'm just going to do a very short talk about insurance. Like Steve said, having that business structure, that's like one of the most key part of your business. But also making sure that you have insurance and you have the correct insurance for your farm operation. I also have a farm myself. I work for Extension full-time and have a lavender farm. So I've had to go through these process within insurance companies and setting up an LLC and subdividing land out to keep it separate from my home property. So it's a process, all of this that we're talking about. So I just have a couple slides on this. So insurance liability, do you currently have insurance? Most likely you have insurance for your house, for your car, motorcycle, your boat, maybe even you have your health insurance. But it's important to have insurance and then also have insurance that's going to cover your farm. In some states, I will say you can have your home and your business insurance together. In other states, you can't. So it's important, depending on what state you're in, to find out what type of insurance that you're allowed to have. Where will you sell your products? Is it going to be at a farm stand? Is it a farmer's market? Are people going to be coming to your property? So farm stands, that would be, on your property, but a farmer's market would also be, they might require like you to have a certain insurance policy amount, and also maybe auto insurance. I know some farmers markets across the state do require like even auto insurance. Having people come to your farm, that brings a whole nother level of liability because a lot of things can happen. Trips and falls. Somebody could get run over by farm equipment. There's a lot of liability that happens when people are on your farm. What product will you be selling and how? So I bring this up because I know we're here to talk about cut flowers for this webinar series. But you might be selling also value added products. So example from my insurance policy, the woman I work with is absolutely wonderful, and she goes through everything that I'm selling on the farm. So from my lavender to what type of containers. So like glass is technically something that they want to know about. So that's included in my policy that I sell glass containers. That's like my candles, the glass jars for people to pick lavender into. Also, even is like you pick too, is like the scissors that is something that is into my policy. Another thing to think about is, do you have event contracts? If people are going to be coming and doing stuff on your farm. So I worked with a lawyer for creating an event contract, because I wanted to make sure it was done correctly. There are templates you can find online and that you can use. But it was really important for my farm and for liability is to have a written event contract. Even in my event contract, I require up to like $1 million is what the lawyer suggested. And also that they get $1 million policy themselves, people that want to have events like weddings or baby showers. It's really not that expensive for people to get like a day insurance policy added on. So that was important for me to go through with a lawyer, and that the insurance company knows about that. Also knowing how safe is your farm to visitors. So looking at your farm, if you have areas where there's like junk piles of stuff that people could get hurt on, if you need to have certain signage, that's really important to know what is safe and what is not. And it's also a good idea to bring somebody else to walk your property and make sure that it is safe. Because if you're on the farm every single day, you might just have blinders on of what is safe and what is not on the farm. And also things change overnight. Rodents come up and dig holes, and that could be a hole somebody could step their foot in and twist their ankle. So it's important to walk your property regularly. And then I mentioned already in the last like couple seconds, checking your property for incidents, and then for clear signage. So on my property, there's certain places I don't actually want people to go to. It's more for privacy, but it could be that it wasn't safe. So like no trespassing signs. I know that one point as my house was being built, it was a construction site. I think anybody who's been around house building or any type of construction site knows that there's a lot of dangerous things. So I had no trespassing signs to try to avoid people going into that and getting hurt. Also things to consider, as I mentioned before, and what just Steve is, what type of business structure you're going to have, maybe subdividing your property out from where the farm is into your house. I do believe if somebody's going to come after you, they're going to try to come after you for everything. So it's just important to figure out a way to divide things as much as you can to protect yourself so you don't lose your home. And then also any incidents that happen on your property, you should have an accident report form that's filled out, and also provide that information to your insurance company. One thing I can say is ask your insurance company if they have an accident report forms that they want you to fill out. By talking to my insurance company, they said that if there's something that happens on the property, like the first procedure is to like take care of that person, call the insurance company, and if those people end up filing like legal action against you, they're going to take over it, and they're going to ask you not to be in contact back and forth and trying to fix the situation. The insurance company is going to handle it, figure out what best course of action is proceeding forward. Some questions to clarify with your insurance is, so when should you talk with your insurance agent or broker? So I'm just gonna bring this up. Anytime you make any changes to, to your farm operation. So when you're starting out, when you make a change, like if you decide you're gonna do cut flowers and invite visitors and then add a play set, ask the insurance company ahead of time, like, am I going to be covered? Is that going to increase my policy? Because that will have financial implications to your farm operation. Just know that an agent represents specific companies. A broker represents you. You know, agents and brokers are great. It just depends on who you want to work with. Find out what's included in that policy. So make sure you read over your policy every year and know the insides and outs. I know I've heard of situations where people looked over their policy, they've really questioned it, and turns out that they weren't completely fully covered. So it's important to go through that, even sit down with your agent or broker and go through the policy and have those conversations. Find out what is not included in the policy, if it's a certain activity, like an automobile, farmer's market, product liability. I know at some point, some policies didn't want to cover people that made homemade soap because of the chemical process and lye and the curing. They didn't want people to get chemical burns and then sue. Find out if the policy is a home, comprehensive, or commercial policy. Know your insurance policy coverage dates and also when you need to pay for your insurance policy. So insurance policies, you know, you can pay like monthly, quarterly, yearly. Just know how your policy is written, and the dates and when you need to pay. And then find out, they do a site visit. If they can come out and do a site visit and see if there's any issues and changes you need to make. I know I've talked to a lot of farms about this, and they actually consider that to be a nice thing that insurance companies will do. I do want to mention that in New York State, we have a New York State Safety and Agritourism Act. So that has limited liability onto farms. I don't believe it's been tested in the state yet. And when I send out the recording, I will also send the links to this. It's basically, in some states they have, like in Vermont and some other states, like their Department of New York State Department, like their Department of Agriculture or their tourism will provide the signage. In New York State, it's not a one size fit all signage. It has to be specific to your farm. So if you have livestock, the signage has to be this inherent risk that, you know, there's livestock and things that happen. So it's important to have signage that goes into that detail. Parts of it is the posting warning signs in areas of potential risk, on farm activities and possibilities of visitors. Distribute information to visitors on directing them to the posted signs, posting directional signage, take reasonable action to prevent foreseeable risk, provide training to employees, and then also providing posting signage, like offering the right to a refund. But I'll provide some more information on that. I would suggest asking your insurance company or potentially a lawyer look over your signage to make sure that it fits within the legal definition of what needs to be done for the signage. So I'm gonna